Okay, I would like to call the August 11th, 2023 special council meeting to order. Having no presiding officer present in the council chambers, the first order of business is the election of President Pro Temp. Are there any nominations for President Pro Temp?
What are we?
May I clarify? Our Kenai Municipal Code establishes if the mayor and vice mayor is not here, the first order of business of the body is to elect a president pro tem. So before we can start the business, we have to elect a chair for this meeting.
I will move to nominate Henry.
I'll second.
Okay, second. Are there any additional nominations? Seeing none, are there any objections to electing myself as President Pro Temp? I've got it.
No.
Okay. Hearing none, I'll serve as the President Pro Temp until Mayor or Vice Mayor arrives or adjournment of the special meeting. So, I'd like to call order the meeting. Let's stand for the pledge, if you're able. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, that gets us to a roll call, please.
Chair Pro Tem
Ms. Clerk.
Nackstead,
Here?
Councilmember Dothett,
Here.
Vice Mayor Baisden is absent, Councilmember Askin,
Here.
Mayor Gabriel is absent, Councilmember Winger,
Present.
Councilmember Sonart.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Clerk. Council, before we get to the agenda, I would like to bring to your attention to the lay-down materials. Add item B1, Resolution 2023-50, a recommendation memo from administration. Are there any additional revisions to the agenda from council?
Councilmember Nackstead, I just want to point out, there's also a laydown that is a memo from bond counsel.
I believe the memo from bond counsel is included with that,
Okay.
that recommendation memo, is it not?
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thank you for that. Pleasure of council. For approval of the agenda.
I'll second the approval.
Somebody needs to make the
Oh,
motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 2023-50, authorizing the issuance of utility revenue bonds in a principal amount not to exceed $1,200,000. With the additional item B1.
First, we need a motion to approve the agenda with the added items.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda with the added items.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
And do I have unanimous consent?
I'll ask for unanimous consent.
Apologize, I got 3 pieces of paper and now I'm using a script. I'd rather just use the agenda.
And I'm just
But-
catching up on the bottom of this.
Yeah. Okay, so unanimous consent was requested. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the agenda is approved. That brings us to the public hearing for Resolution 2023-50, authorizing the issuance of utility bonds for a principal amount not to exceed $1,200,000 to finance the cost of planning, designing, and constructing the city's water treatment pump house and related capital improvements, and to submit the question to the issuance of such bonds to the qualified voters of the city of Kenai at the general election in and for the city of Kenai on October 3rd, 2023. Pleasure of council.
I'd like to move to adopt resolution number 2023-50.
A second?
I will second.
And we have a second. Before we go further, I'd like to get a report from administration. I think you've got the lay down you want to talk about too.
Thank you, President Pro Tem, council members. First, again, I'd like to recognize the efforts of our Public Works Director for applying for this program. I think this represents a great opportunity for the city. Having said that, I think what we're kind of dealing with here is a little bit of a square peg in a round hole. The federal infrastructure bill provided billions of dollars for water and sewer projects nationally. The mechanism or the vehicle that was chosen to disperse these funds was the revolving loan funds that are utilized by states. And it's not been unusual for those revolving loan funds to have components of some amount of principal forgiveness. It is a little bit unique right now that they're utilizing these revolving loan funds with 100% principal forgiveness. And I think that was, I mean, I'm going to give you my opinion. I think that was done likely because this was the most expeditious manner that they could get these funds out and get projects going. They already had existing programs, they have existing guidelines, and they just picked something they already had. What's problematic for us at the city is that they call it a loan, which, you know, on the surface looks like it could trigger our debt provisions within our charter. But in reality, this is much like behaving like a grant, where, you know, the city continually gets grants for projects in which we have to forward fund the money, not with an appropriation, but utilize our own cash. We have to adhere to all the program guidelines, all the compliance, and dot all the I's and cross the T's. And then at the end, we get reimbursed with those grant funds. And that's similarly what we're going to be doing in the case, we're recommending in the case of this program is, you know, the city would actually forward fund with an appropriation the project. We would then complete the project, assuring that we met all program guidelines, walk through a closeout with the state, submit our expenditures. They would reimburse us for our cost, and then immediately forgive the debt or apply a subsidy that's provided by the federal government that's not subject to an appropriation. The money is already there. And, you know, in essence, we believe, and with concurrence of bond counsel, that no loan is really, no debt is created. And so, you know, in the abundance of caution, we started down this path because we had some questions, and we worked with the state and DEC to work on some amendments to their proposed loan documents that made things a little bit clearer that we weren't in fact incurring any debt. And I think we're relatively successful in that. We did get an opinion, or the memo that's included with the laydown tonight, from JDO Law, Jermaine Dunnigan and Owens, that did concur, you know, subject to the above. We do not believe voter authorization is necessary for the city to enter into the above described financing arrangement with the department. So based upon that, looking at our own capacity for projects and things, we feel like this is the most expeditious way for us to move forward, is to not go for a vote, and because we're really not incurring debt. And at the end of this, we would like, you know, we were recommending to council that you postpone the resolution before you tonight indefinitely, and we will continue working to get the project moving forward. Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. And just be clear, Council, on Zoom with us tonight is Cindy Cartledge. Cindy is the attorney we worked with at JDO, and she is available if Council would like to ask her any questions.
Thank you for that report. Before we bring it back to council, is there anybody in the general public or on Zoom that would like to speak to Resolution 2023-50? There's nobody on Zoom?
There are no attendees on Zoom.
Okay. Well, with that, then we'll bring it back to council for discussion. Councilmember Winger.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you guys for your time and work on this and preparing this for us, for your thorough explanation. I know, I think there's a lot of stigma. We've had talks where I stand a lot of times when it comes to hearing the word bond. And I know just discussing this with people in the community, even with 100% repayment, it was likely that people, there's still going to be the no's on the bond, just simply because they don't understand the scope or maybe the full reimbursement on this project. And I think going forward with your explanation, it'll help us better pan this out for our constituents to understand, maybe give a little bit more clarity and peace of mind, because I know just when they heard the words bonds, that's enough to start getting people to kind of get worried about what's coming down. So I appreciate your thorough explanation on how we got to this point, and thank you.
Any further discussion on that? Assuming that we're going to take the recommendation to do that, before we do, if I could just ask a question regarding, we're going to be shifting some other monies in the water and sewer fund to fund this initially before we get reimbursed. Is there any possibility, or does it make sense to consider funding some of those three projects with maybe general fund money or other monies, if we don't want them to fall off or be pushed back? Terry?
Yeah, thank you, President Pro Tem. We did have those conversations internally, and we can ask the finance director to speak to it if you'd like, but right now the water and sewer utility doesn't have the capacity to appropriate the full $1.2 million for the project without redirecting some funds we appropriated on July 1 for 3 other projects that we haven't even started yet, that were of a lower priority than this project in the utility. Utilizing general funds could be an option. I did have these discussions with the Public Works Director. He didn't feel like any of those 3 projects were necessarily mission critical. The other thing I'd draw council's attention to a little bit is that, we also have a $2.9 million grant in the utility to build a aeration basin blower building down at the sewer treatment plant. This will be a $1.2 million project. I'm not real sure how much more internal capacity we have to do some of these other projects at the same time also. I think, they would likely slip on time anyway. So I don't feel like we really need to appropriate. We certainly, the fund itself has some capacity every year to fund projects. We could look again in the early or later in 2024 for a fiscal 25 reappropriation if we thought it was necessary at that time, and we determine our capacity to manage that would be there. So I don't think it's necessary right now, but I think it's a great question.
Is there anybody from Zoom? Councilmember Sonar.
Thank you. Maybe a question for Mr. Eubank. Right now, the 100% forgiveness is described as, or is designated as allocated. At what point does it become guaranteed?
I believe it becomes guaranteed when the city completes the project and completes the closeout project with DEC, whereby we submit all of our expenditures. We also have to submit, I think, some final operating documents, have the facility in operation. There's a checklist that we have to go through. Much like I said earlier, would be a grant eligibility process for a very similar thing. And once we meet all those program guidelines, then we would be reimbursed. That's when, the point at which they provide us the reimbursement, they would also apply the subsidy provided by the federal government to forgive the loan.
Right, and is there any possible scenario, whereas all the work is completed and we turn in all the paperwork necessary to be reimbursed, and they say, oops, we can only reimburse you 60%, so you have to come up with 40%. At that point in time, would we be in arrears with the public for not having had the vote if we have to take a 40% bond debt loan? I mean, is that even possible? I'm just asking.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. Councilmember Sonart, I think anything is possible, but I think they would be in violation of the loan agreement that we would be signing that says we are eligible for 100% subsidy. And the only provisions in that contract that indicate we would not be eligible, I believe, is if we don't take a draw within like 2 years of the start of the project, they can terminate the agreement. There are no other provisions. Unlike the state of Alaska's debt forgiveness or debt reimbursement program for school bonded indebtedness that is subject annually to appropriation of the legislature, we don't have a situation like that where this is subject to a future appropriation. I believe they have the funding. All we have to do is complete the eligibility and complete the checklist, and we are 100% eligible.
Okay, and
Doing your
last
job is
question.
normal.
Has anything like this been done in the past? And if so, how successful was it? I mean, not necessarily the water pump project, but I mean, having a bond debt loan that was forgiven, and maybe it went in front of the voters, maybe it didn't. But is there any history with this scenario? I'm just curious.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. Councilmember Sonart, I have no experience with a situation like that. I would perhaps ask Cindy. I mean, she has a lot of bond experience, if she's ever seen a situation like you're describing.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hi, through President Pro Tem, Councilmember Sonia. My name's Cindy Cartley, for the record, and with Jermaine Dunnigan and Owens. I have worked with a number of communities who have gone through the ADEC program, not 100% subsidy, and ADEC has performed on the back end. But as you said, I mean, you mentioned the word guarantee. There's no guarantees. Things could happen. Not likely, but nobody can, I mean, there is no guarantee. You enter into an agreement and you agree to do this, and the state, I suspect, will fulfill its agreement, but there's not an ironclad guarantee. What ADEC has done with, so there's one community that has some larger projects, and they were going through USDA RD. And so they had to find interim financing. So they actually issued a utility revenue bond to support that interim financing, which was then taken out, and the long-term debt was put into place, the bonds. And it did require a vote of the people. So it does happen. City of Homer, so what they do sometimes with regards to their special assessment districts, that's another sort of exception, but it's a workaround with regards to the debt issue, because there's a defined source of revenues which are pledged for repayment of the ADEC loan. but there is an actual loan in those instances. This is as was described, trying to put that round peg in a square hole. This is unusual. 100% subsidy, and it's an incredible opportunity for the city. It's just something that I've not seen, and they really haven't tailored their documentation to fit it precisely. But I will say Terry and Scott moved very quickly on this. I mean, it's only been out there, the letter was received on August 1, and they've had some great progress with ADEC. Pretty stunning.
Councilmember Winger?
Thank you. I guess I just have a couple of questions. I think maybe this would be for Scott. First off, going forward on this project, what is going to be our time frame of getting this going? Are we going to see any big delays? I know when we're purchasing things, we're seeing year-out delays. This is something that we're going to be able to kind of get going on.
Mr. Curtin?
Thank you. Councilmember Naxted and Winger. Once I have approval to access these funds, this will run a normal project course. So we would go out for an RFP and secure, well, actually we have a term contract, actually I take that back, with HDL Engineering for the water and sewer plant. So this would run a normal design course to develop construction bid-ready documents, and then those would go out for bid to construct a building in the pump house. And to give you a little bit of background on this, really with any grant, we do this with the FAA grants. We have done some other. I think the last one that I did was the aeration basin blowers 4 or 5 years ago. That was through the state revolving fund as well. So we will have a counterpart with these state agencies that we communicate with. And, you know, we go back and forth on what we're doing to make sure that the project is remaining, you know, within the intent of the loan in the program. So they will communicate back and forth with us. If they thought something was ineligible or outside the, you know, the intent of those funds, they would let us know before we went down that road spending, you know, that money. So we call it gaining concurrence and approval to construct before we, you know, to get to those steps. So we're generally answering those questions through the process before we, you know, we're getting too far down the road. And that's a common thing. We do that with the FAA. We do that when we do change orders, for example. We get concurrence from the granting agency so that we know if something has the potential to be deemed ineligible for a grant. Then I work with finance through that process because we may have to appropriate funds differently to allow that work to continue. So we would know before it became an issue.
Thank you. And then we heard that this isn't a common thing. So do you think that the city of Kenai is being looked at or eligible for this from the procedures that you've put in place and your due diligence on your testings? Do you think any of your processes are what's making our projects more appealing for this type of funding?
Thank you again, Councilman Member Winger, for the question. I think very similar to what City Manager Eubanks said. I think the federal government has a pile of money that they've slated for these types of infrastructure grants, and they're trying to essentially pick the quickest path of getting that out to the local governments. So there's several avenues that they could choose. This is one that is available in Alaska that's used on a regular routine basis. So I think as far as how they're delivering the funds, I think that's how that's being handled. All projects, we're always competing against other municipalities and agencies in the state for these projects. This one received a score based on how the application was filled out. You know, for my mid-months, I'm a big picture guy. I like to attach pictures, and that generally tends to tell a good story. And we have multiple ones of these out. I think the unusual part with this is that it's from the get-go. It's 100% forgiven. That has not always been the case. I'll be honest with you, I expect we're going to get more of these. I have, talked about this. I have had concerns that we're going to get one of these that's not going to be 100% forgivable. It'll be some percentage, difference. And at that point, it's still, if that's deemed a loan and how we need to proceed, that may at that time have to go to the voters. But this isn't the only one that I have out in play. I have others that are, I may come to you here 2, 3, 4 months from now with others. And it might be a little different scenario. So we'll have to address these as they come.
Any further discussion? Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you. I wanted to address also Councilmember Sonart's question, if I could again. What I do also want to make clear is that the city will be appropriating the full $1.2 million of our own funds to complete construction on this project. So if for some reason the state said we only have 40% of, or let's say 50% of loan forgiveness, at that point we could take $600,000, the complete subsidy, and we will have already paid with our own money the other $600,000, and we do not have to incur debt. I mean, that is part of the mechanism here too, by us forward funding, utilizing our own money, is to assure that we don't incur debt. At that point, what we're taking the risk is that we may not get reimbursed for everything we thought we were going to get reimbursed, and we will end up spending $600,000 of the utilities money on the project. But I don't believe there's any danger of us incurring actual debt.
Any more questions?
I think this is a great program. I think it's going to be, like you said, I think we're going to see more and more of this with the federal government rolling out billions of dollars. They got to figure out ways to get it out there. This is brand new, and I think, like was mentioned, I think we're going to see more of these kind of programs coming back with 100% forgiveness, because, like you said, it's the fastest way to get it to local governments. And it's just, from what I can tell, it seems like a rebranding from a grant to a bond with forgiveness. It's just a different name for the same thing. Essentially, just to handle slightly different, to get it through a different path as soon as possible. And I think we should definitely take advantage of this and continue to take advantage of these to get that money funneled to the city of Kenai to fix our infrastructure, take advantage of the funds that are allocated for these kind of antiquated infrastructure issues with older cities is what they need them for, and that's what we need to take advantage of them for. I think it's a great opportunity, and I hope we can see more of them.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to table indefinitely resolution number 2023-50.
Have a second?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to postpone indefinitely resolution number 2023-50.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
I see Councilmember Askin has a question, or?
No, I don't. I was trying to second the motion, but it's okay.
Okay. Is that a unanimous consent, or do we want to vote?
I'll request unanimous consent.
Okay, I hear we got a unanimous consent was requested. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. So that gets us down to item C, public comment. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak about anything? We don't have anybody on Zoom. So that brings us down to adjournment with all business concluded. We're adjourned. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Sorry for being late.